Alright, so welcome to the SuperCoach Nuff channel. In today's video we're going to have a look at the team list for round 2 of the trials. So essentially a mini version of Team List Tuesday, as a majority of the teams have gone and named what we think would be full strength sides. So it's pretty exciting. So I thought we'll have a look at the teams and guess how that impacts our decisions in our SuperCoach teams. Given that obviously, there will change in a couple of weeks' time when round 1 kicks off anyway. So the Knights and the Eels, rather, uh, first game on Friday night. So the Knights, you can see, are going to roll out with Lachlan Miller at fullback, Kalen Ponga in at the 6, um, Greg Marzio on the wing. So I think there's been a bit of talk about those guys. Maybe not so much Kalen Ponga in terms of Supercoach, but more so the second coming of his shift to 5'8". And as there's a massive storm here in Brisbane, so apologies if I get a bit distracted throughout this. And then in the forward pack, probably the big sort of talking point there, Adam Elliott pushing himself, or not pushing himself, but the coach putting him on the bench. Kurt Mann getting the start at 13, which was a bit of talk around where Elliott would get a go. So he's probably not one I would consider, but should still get good minutes off the bench given that got Phoenix Crossland as the dummy half relief. And Jack John's probably more of an edge back rower type player. Could play a bit of 13 too, I suppose. But yeah, a bit light on in the engine room there. So you'd think Elliott would be playing a lot of prop. For the Eels, a couple of interesting names there in the centre wing. So Lumi, Zach Sini, and Sean Russell. But it does say in the notes that Wonga Blake and Hayes Dunster should both be in contention for round 1 as well. So not quite sure where the cheap option is there in the Penrith Parramatta backline even. But I'm sure that will reveal itself in round 1. So you could have a placeholder there. Ideally, Zach Sini would be the man, bottom dollar, cheapie. Would love to see it. In the forwards, a couple of cheap options there in Matt Dury and Jermaine Hopgood. It looks like Jermaine Hopgood is locked into that 13 spot, which is fantastic. Matt Dury a bit less so, considering Bryce Cartwright has not been considered for selection in this game, whether they're resting him or he's got a little niggling injury. And obviously Ryan Madison will be back after round 3. So if he does get the start, he'd be an excellent option for the team, but um, I think there's better options and um, more security around their position than with Matt Dury. So probably give him a miss for the time being. The next game, the Roosters and the Seagulls. So the Roosters, you can see, are fairly full strength. Luke Keary is sitting this one out, so Drew Hutchinson slides in there, and you'd imagine he would be on the interchange bench come round 1. But the forward pack, the two Butchers, got the second row spots there, so maybe Egan Butcher's a little bit more value. Um, but again, we don't know how long Angus Crichton's out for, so I probably wouldn't go for him as the first option. And then for the Seagulls, you can see they're missing a few of their key spine members, so Tommy Turbo, DCE, Lachlan Croker, all missing. But I guess one thing I'm personally cheering about Sean Keppie getting a starting spot. I thought he'd be in the 10, but they've obviously put him in the 13. So it looks like he'll get some solid minutes. And as a cheap option on our front row bench, that's really what we want. I guess obviously the one Josh Schuster playing 6, that's, most people have him, so almost not worth talking about. The other one that's piqued my interest is on the bench, Filiami Fafita. So Ethan Bullymore's a bit more of a second row. Jake Toby, I think, is more of a back substitute sort of player, so he'll fill in the back line somewhere. So in terms of where those front row minutes are going to come in, I think Filiami Fafita will get some of them. Sipley's never played a lot of big minutes. So Yeah, bottom dollar cheapie, I believe. Dual position, so you might see very soon that he's in the team. I guess also on the Roosters side of things, Siwa Wong, bottom dollar second row option. So would be better if he was starting, but could be an option. Um, and I think also missing from this side is Warrior Hargraves. So maybe White might not be the best sort of cheap option there off the interchange bench anyway at this point in time. The third game, so the first of the Saturday games, is the Community Shield or Charity Shield. I can't remember which one it is. There's too many of those sort of shields between the Dragons and the Rabbitohs. Apologies to Dragons and Rabbitohs fans. So the Dragons looking pretty full strength. So Tyrell Sloan in fullback. Um, I know they've got the bye round one, but I'm going to save a trade and lock him in on my bench as a centre wing option. Moses Mbine at 6, so there was a bit of talk about Jaden Sullivan getting that spot, but he's got the bench utility spot, as you can see down there. Um, so you think he'd play a little bit of hooker, relieving Jacob Little. But the other one that I guess a few people have been talking about and looks like it will come to fruition is Ben Murdoch-Masila on the edge for the Dragons. And especially given they're going pretty prop heavy in the middle, maybe Josh Kerr could play a bit on the edge. But it looks like he's up for some big minutes. So he'll be one to definitely consider for that second row cheaper positions, I suppose. The Rabbitohs look pretty much as you'd expect them to look. So the trail at the back obviously is a great shout. Isaac Thompson on the wing. He's one that I've sort of warmed up to more and more throughout the preseason, even though he hasn't played. Just the thought of him playing outside of Campbell Graham um, and pretty strong attacking team is worth a shout. And then on the bench, probably the big inclusion is Shaq Mitchell. So a lot of people had Davey Moali locked into that spot as a middle player. But I guess the other thing looking at the bench is you've got Blake Taff and Peter Mamzoulis, so two sort of smaller players on the bench. So you think there would be one more front rower to come in. So whether that is Moali or someone else remains to be seen. Just looking down the list, yeah, he's there in the 21. So perhaps he does come into this spot, but I guess, if you want to read into it, maybe Shaq Mitchell is the one getting more minutes over someone like Moali. So again, that's probably one to wait and see in round one. So then we've got the World Club Challenge. So I guess we only really need to concern ourselves with the Penrith side. No Dylan Edwards, so Taruva would obviously make way. Crichton would slide back into the centres. But interestingly, the interchange bench, they've gone with Jack Cogger as the interchange utility. So that sort of suggests that Mitch Kenny will play some big minutes, which is exciting. There was a bit of talk about him and Sony Luke job sharing. So he could come back into consideration. I guess the other thing, Zach Hosking, there's been a lot of talk about him. Obviously, he's taking Liam Martin's spot in this instance, but he could very easily shift edges in round one. So Luke Garner is someone that I'm starting to go a bit cool on as well for that particular reason. Plus, I guess I wasn't that hot on him to begin with. Yeah, especially that the left edge of Penrith, a lot of that was driven by big Billy Kickow, and he's obviously not there anymore. So probably going to be one of the changes on my team is Garner out. Spoiler alert there. Broncos Cowboys is the last game on Saturday. So no Reece Walsh, he's locked himself into the round one team, so they've given him a rest. And so obviously then Jesse Arthurs is probably the odd man out there. Selwyn Cobbo will go back to the 5 next week. The forward pack, Corey Jensen, I'm not sure what his price point is. I will have a bit of a look in a minute. But cheap option in the front row could be good. If he is cheap, that is. But definitely not the first choice. Billy Walters starting over Corey Pakes, so there was a bit of talk about that. Um, and then Piakura on the bench, I think he's been cheap for a couple of years now, so might be worth a look. But I mean, he'd only be as an edge forward anyway, so edge forwards on the bench usually not ideal. The Cowboys side of things looking pretty full strength there, so not a lot of cheap options in the back line. But if you're looking for points in the early rounds with their soft draw, absolutely get on. Um, in the forwards again, looking pretty strong. Cohen Hess has got that second row spot, and I think he is a bit cheaper than what I guess you'd expect. So dual position as well, so he might be a little useful value piece in your side. The bench looks pretty much like it will be. Interestingly, they've only gone with 20 players, so they've really, I guess, refined their team going into round one. Warriors and Storm on Sunday morning of local time. So the Warriors, Charles Nickel Clockstad at fullback. That's a win for SuperCoach. It's Murray Martin named at 6, so I was hoping Luke Metcalf would get the run. Might still do so with a good performance, but I guess you'd like to see him in the team now. Interestingly, Josh Curran on the bench. Not sure what the thinking is there. But Jackson Ford is a potential cheap option um, on that edge, but I would have thought Josh Curran would probably slide into that spot in round one. Melbourne Storm, so they've named a pretty full strength looking side. Ryan Pappenhausen out for about 8 weeks was the report today, so Nick Meaney will play fullback, not the cheapest, but again, if you're looking for a sort of value premium option, he plays fullback. He'll probably kick goals. Storm are a pretty decent attacking team, so he could do worse than Nick Meaney. So Will Warbrick, he must be a cheap option because I'll be honest, I've not heard of him, and I'm not sure um, who should be in that spot. It scares me. Xavier Coates, perhaps. I'm not sure what he's doing. Grant Anderson on the other wing. So what was it last year? I can't even remember. That's pretty ordinary. I should have done my research before the video. But Remus Smith, I would have thought, was a locked-in centre, and young Tom Tonomapia getting a chance given Justin Olam's injury. So again, might have to have a look at those prices, and there might be some value in the Storm backline. In the forwards, so Big Nelson was supposed to, or talk he was going to play on the edge, but they've gone with Trent Loiero and Eli Katoa. So I thought maybe he wasn't a shout after last week. Excuse me, itchy nose. Um, but yeah, interesting to see that he's got that spot. And I guess another one who I was sort of hoping would get a spot somewhere, Tom Eisenhuth, named to start at 13. So Josh King on the bench. Whether that's the case in round one remains to be seen, but I would love Big Tommy to get a start. He'll definitely be in my super coach team if he's anywhere in the starting 13. If he's on the bench, a bit more iffy because he generally tends to be the hole filler on the edge or out in the centres wherever he's needed. But if they're going to play him at 13, I'll be all over that all day long. And on the bench, Bronson Garlick, he'd be a sort of dummy half option, rest out Harry Grant. Josh King, as we said, Tui, Chris Lewis, he was one I thought might get an edge spot, so that's interesting. Xavier Coates named on the bench, so maybe they're just going to ease him in. Dean Aramea, he was the other bloke I was trying to think of that was on the wing, so I should have just looked further down the list. So not sure what's going on there. Maybe just easing those guys in. Or it could be a case of, I guess, they're trying to work out these guys who will fill in the free spot for Justin Olam. But yeah, so some interesting decisions there. Tigers Raiders next game. So the Tigers looks like they're resting Luke Brooks. Unless he's slipped that far down the pole since Sheensy's got in, I wouldn't have thought so. Tommy Talau named in the centres, that's promising. And Stefano named in the front row. So again, that's also very exciting to see. Um, Unfortunately, Sean Blaw's on the bench behind Alex Seyfarth, and you'd imagine when he returns to the country, John Bateman. So, yeah, I guess from that, yeah, Stefano and Tommy Talau are probably the two shouts. And the Raiders gone pretty full strength as well. So Danny Levi, interestingly, is starting again. That's been the talk of pre-season. But Tom Starling is named at 18. I wouldn't read too much into that. They've gone with Schneider and Frawley, the two halves on the official bench. So I'm guessing that's not their first choice bench. Um, yeah, so I guess, that not too much in the way of cheapies there other than Levi. But your guns like Tarpany, Hudson Young, and a few people were keen on, they've got their positions. I guess Jordan Rapiner, uh, playing fullback for Xavier Savage, could be a bit of a pot option early doors in the centre wing. The Bulldogs and the Sharks. So the Dogs, pretty much their full strength side. I can't see uh, any big omissions. So Hayes Perriman at fullback. He's going to be locked in the centre wing for me. Tavita Pangai playing prop, so hopefully getting some good minutes there. Um, Billy Kickout in second row, love to see it. And on the bench, Josh Reynolds getting the sort of utility spot from New Brown. He's not on the list either. I haven't checked to see if he's injured or not, or what's going on there. Ryan Gray did all right as the backup hooker last week. So, yeah, guys like Jacob Preston as well killed it. Frankie Pele, would love to see him in the side over maybe a Corey Waddell, but I'm not the coach. So yeah, I'm pretty confident that's going to be their 1 to 17 next week. That's how they'll start against the Sharks. Sharks looking pretty full strength as well. So Royce Hunt in the front row starting. That could be an interesting shout. I'm not sure on his value. Teague Wilton's an interesting one if he can sort of claim 80 minutes on the edge. I guess the iffy part of that is Wade Graham being on the bench. Whether, and especially I guess when you look at the other three, McInnes, Kafusi, Hamlin, and Welly, all being middle forwards, you'd think that Wade Graham would play some edge. Obviously, in an emergency where the outside backs are injured, Wade Graham could slide out there. But um, yeah, I guess probably wouldn't have him as number one option anyway, Teague Wilton. Uh, and so then the last game, if my counting is correct, the Dolphins and the Titans. So the Dolphins, there could be an interesting one with Jack Bostock. I think he's playing because Edric Lee is injured. So if he was to be in round one, you'd imagine that he's going to get a spot. And Robert Jennings on the other wing. Milford and O'Sullivan in the halves, so we'd love to see Katoa get a run there at some point. But definitely not from the start of the season. The forward pack, all the experience there. Tommy Gilbert at 13. Uh, so he's still a pretty good pick, I believe. Especially given the bench. He's got Nicarima, Ray Stone, Wallace SSA. So Ray Stone, I think maybe if he was looking at getting some more minutes, would be worth an option. He played really well last week, but I can't see where he gets a lot of minutes given the rest of the forward pack there. Um, and yeah, and on the Titans side of things, so it looks like Tanner Boyd's got the halfback spot, so he'll definitely be in my team. Um, guess the one disappointing thing from this list, Aaron Clark on the bench. So Isaac Liu getting the start at 13. So I've been big on Aaron Clark all preseason, but unfortunately I think he might have to slide out of my team list. So just double check that was the last of the teams. Yep, lovely. So I guess, how does this impact our Supercoach sides, or mine in particular? So the hookers, so I've still got Brandon Smith and Tanner Boyd. I guess the one that could come into contention now off the back of those lists is Mitch Kenny. He could be back. Um, but I think what would happen to get him in the side was Boyd would become halfback two, and I might have to get rid of the double guns, which isn't the worst thing in the world. You know, I guess, there's a lot of money tied up there, so there could be some more value elsewhere. A lot of people sort of not starting with Hines because they're waiting for him to dip in value. A good mate of mine is actually starting with that Cleary because of the round three bye. So he's going to start with Hines and then actually flick Hines for Cleary because Hines' bye is not long after that. Um, but yeah, that's one potential theory. I guess Danny Levi as well, you can see, is in that price zone. So he is an option. But I guess, the next one on my list would probably be Mitchell Kenny. But for now, I'll leave things as is. The front row, as you can see, I've got Tommy Gilbert, Daniel Saifidi, Sean Kepi, and I did have Jack Hellington, but he is actually going to go. And in his place, I'm going to go all the way to the bottom. If I can find him, I'll have to just type it. There we are. So Viliami for feeder. So if he can get those minutes, yeah, he's absolutely in the team. I'll just have a quick look at the other cheaper options. So Pele missed out. Mawali or Shaq Mitchell. So I mean, if I don't want the two Manly players, which I will address very shortly, um, I can obviously bring in one of those guys depending on how South line up for round one. But I would love to have both. Maybe it's for feeder goes. Again, it all depends on the minutes and how that looks going forward. Um, the Roosters player White is obviously not a front rower, so I know he was an option on the bench, but for the Roosters, but he's not even a front rower. So we'll go with that for the time being. Although, like, actually, what we might do just to make sure we've got enough cash for everyone is to put in who's more expensive. I think Shaq Mitchell is. Oh, they're the same price. So I'll put in Shaq. It can obviously be Moali if that does pan out that way. But yeah, we've still got enough money, so we're doing okay. All right, the second race. This is where we've got to make some changes. So currently, I have Kepi. I might go with Fafita. I've already forgotten his name. Fafita. I've got Schuster, obviously. I've also got Tommy Turbo. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 Seagulls, and they have the buy in round two. So um, as much as I'd love to have Olaquatu starting in the team, it's probably going to be stretch me a bit thin in the second round. So this is one of the, I guess, additional challenges of Supercoach this year with the teams having the bye, is you do need to not stack your team with one particular side. So he's going to go. Unfortunately, Aaron Clark's going to go, given it looks like he's going to start on the bench. Tarek Sims is going to go just because there's cheaper options at Melbourne. And Luke Garner's going to go. As I said, I'm not the strongest on him at the moment. So I think the way we're going to go is in terms of the starting players, I'm going to go for my next sort of gun option, which is David Fafita. Him and Tanner Boyd hopefully get that combination, so there's a little bit of a stack going on there. But also hope that he can reach his form. And if he can reach his best form, obviously he is value, even though he's at 700k. After that, we're going to go a bit cheaper. How cheap? I'm not 100% sure. So scrolling through the lists, I'll plug in my main man that I talked about earlier, Tom Eisenhuth. So it says he's injured. Don't believe the hype. If he's starting anyway, he's a lock. Also has that nice little swing into the centre wing. which could be useful later in the season once all the cheap second centre wings do their thing. So he's one of them. Then who's next? How much have we got? We've still got a mil, so we can go fairly expensive if we want, but do want to chase some of the value that we saw in the second row. So just got to find some of the names. Yeah, so Luke Garner. Tuolangi, it looks like he's going to get the start at the Seagulls. I don't know if I talked about that. But again, too many Seagulls. Eli Katoa. So if he does get a start in the second row, yeah, 411, I'd have a bit of that. Cohen Hess starting at the Cowboys. Trent Loiero. So again, we might do a bit of the Katoa, so he's the more expensive option, although yeah, having two Storm players there could be a bit dicey. um, and then the other one was, I know who it was, if I can find it. Yeah, so Ben Murdoch Masilla. So not playing this week, but again, saving a trade for round two, dual position, which particularly if I get Fafita in there, that's the nice little swing. Um, and then also, I guess, it does open up the options going forward of someone like Tavita Pangai. Looks like he's going to start in the front row, so he'll get that swing. Sean Kepi, if he's going to be named at 13. Even maybe Jake Trbojevic getting front row status if he's named at 10. So, um, yeah, so I still got a fair bit to spend there. So, I mean, I don't think any of the bottom dollar cheapies were probably worth having at this point, other than Fafita in the front row. So at the moment, I can stick with Hines and Cleary, Burton and Schuster in the 5'8". They're all going to stay. The back line, pretty happy with. I guess the decision I'm tossing up is between Talau, um, and then it's between him and Thompson. And as I said, I'm a bit higher on Thompson, just given that, yeah, he's probably going to be on a better attacking side, particularly early doors. Um, so he might jump in value a bit quicker, and uh, could come down to the ownership percentages and a bit of a pod call on that. Um, but yeah, I guess the other option, given that we do have so much cash, is to then go up to a gun in the second centre wing. So obviously I've gone fairly cheap, but that's just because there's so much value in that position. But if I get rid of that, so Joey Manu, probably a bit overpriced. I'll wait for him to dip. Ruben Garrick by round two, so I might give him a miss early doors. Val Holmes is obviously an option. 25% of people agree. Nick Meaney, now that Paps is confirmed out, he'd be a pretty solid option in there. So, I mean, it could even be the case of a couple of these guys making their way into the team. But again, I'm pretty happy with these six options at centre wing. Perham, Nick said, Tabby Waifito all playing fullback. So plenty of opportunities to increase value. Tyrell Sloan, same deal. Alamotti and Khan Pereira, bottom dollar cheapies that are playing. So you got to take those when you can get them. Yeah, so whichever way I go, I'm not 100% sure. But as I said, to start with, I'll probably go with Isaac Thompson. And that extra money, so what have we got? 467k if I go that way. We can use that to bolster. So we probably don't need to go so cheap with the second row. So we might even be able to look at a third gun there. Bring everyone back into it. So as I said, I'd love to probably have Olakuatu. And I mean, look, let's put him back in just for a second. We can have a bit of a play around. I know this video's gone on a bit, so I won't spend too much time playing around with it. Um, or I guess the other option, it's not ideal, but Who was the cheap player? We just had the Katoa. So what could happen is we could swap Gilbert and Murdoch Masilla around and actually have another gun in the front row, so we can have whoever we want. So could get on a bit of Joey Tarpany or Payne Haas. So I mean, there's another sort of keeper locked in. I'd have to do a bit of a comparison on those two just to see where the value lies. And then Gilbert could start, Katoa could come from the bench. But yeah, as far as like the structure goes, I'd be happy with that. Having a bit of extra money in the front row to have a lock-in keeper. As I said, I sort of consider Safidi to be a cut price keeper too. So we're already 2/3 of the way to the front row. Um, yeah, and a bit more money there in the second row. Could always sort of cut these guys down and create another gun spot. But yeah, so that's probably the big question from this team is do we go sort of Katoa Gilbert, spend 900k that way, or is it more of a Olakuatu and then you'd probably need a near bottom dollar cheapie to make that work. So um, someone like a Siwa Wong might fit the bill. Guess the third option, just to throw in one more, as I said, is to bring Mitch Kenny in. Tanner Boyd would fill in for one of the halves, and that obviously frees up then about 600k to even upgrade both of these guys, add someone in the centre wing, that sort of thing. So maybe a bit of balance in the squad overall, but then potentially missing the upside of the two weapons in the halves. All right, but we might leave it there for the time being. Save the team so I don't lose it. Obviously, 2 weeks until Team Week Tuesday, so a lot can change in that time. Team List Tuesday. I think I said Team Week. Team List Tuesday. Yeah, so a lot can change in that time. As I said, a few things to ponder and consider. Um, and I guess given the amount of time, I might even do some of those comparisons, like Tarpany and Haas. Which Manly players the target. There seems to be a few minutes on offer. Storm, same sort of deal. And yeah, so like I said, we'll wrap it up there. So feel free to comment, like, subscribe. It's been pretty cool to see a few people subscribe, getting a couple of comments. So thanks very much to those of you who have. Um, and if you haven't, like I said, get onto it. And other than that, I'll see you in the next one.